Now let's think about the key for the identification. Here in this list we have several persons with last names, the first names, different last names, different first names, and some description of the gender, the address and the phone number. And we also have a person number here. And if you think about the key for the identification, then you have to first look what combinations of the attributes might identify one of these persons uniquely. So you look at the names, for example, the name Thaler Andreas or Falk Bernhard, and you would say, okay, there are some names which are so unique that you might use them as the unique identification, but how about maybe a Thomas Miller? Thomas Miller, maybe this name is not uniquely used worldwide. So if you would use the combination of last name and first name as the key for the identification, you would get a problem if you would have several Thomas Millers. Having several Thomas Millers means that you cannot use the combination of last name and first name as unique key, and you have to think about another unique key for identification. Then maybe you add the city to the combination of attributes which build the key for identification. So thinking about last name, first name and city, maybe in Berlin there are several Thomas Millers, then this wouldn't make sense. So taking maybe more attributes to build a key for identification, you see that it makes the thing more complicated. Even if you use the phone number, maybe on some point it's unique, but first name, last name and phone number might not be unique enough. So in this case, instead of adding more attributes to build that unique key, you just define one artificial key. In this case, the person number is the artificial key, the first column here in the table. Person number, you assign each person one unique person number. So for all your persons, then you solve the problem of the uniqueness. You just have to pay attention to the assignment of the person numbers. Each new person should get a new person number which is not contained in the set of person numbers yet. Now let's just look on the properties, on the terms, on the definitions. Here's the primary key first. Primary key is that thing, that unique key you need for identifying one entity. It can be a combination of attributes. In some cases, a combination of attributes makes sense. In our case, the combination of attributes for identifying a person does not make sense. Then you use an artificial key, an artificial primary key, or so to say, surrogate key. The primary key is assigned to each person, and each person should have its unique primary key. So no two persons, no two entities must have the same primary keys. One primary key value for one person, another primary key value for another person. And we will later use this primary key to identify this very person, this very entity, and to use it in references to other entities, references which are built up by relationship types. Relationship types which somehow connect entities of different entity sets. We looked at the artificial key in our case of the persons. So we found that a combination of attributes does not make sense. We have some natural attributes which might, in some complex combination, lead to a primary key, but it's not very appropriate, so we define an artificial key or the surrogate key. And one thing you might think about also is that the combination of the attributes is not stable in the future. So maybe in our case of the persons, the phone number is not the same all time. So then you should not use the phone number as part of the primary key. You should more think about an artificial key. Or a combination could be inappropriate if the natural key combination is too large. Like in our case, if you take the name, last name, first name, street address and the phone number, then it might be too large to register it as the primary key for identification. Then you should try to find a more compact primary key, and the more compact primary key could be such an artificial key, the person number in our case. So primary key or artificial primary key is, so to say, the attribute which identifies a person. And on the other side, if you somehow reference this person in another entity set, for example, if you want to refer to this person if the person has an examination as the student, for example, then you would talk about the so-called foreign key. Then the foreign key is the primary key from the entity set person, for example, from this table person we saw, is a primary key used in another entity set or in another table to build up the reference. We will see how that works with different cardinalities in the relationship set later on, but just that you heard this term now, foreign key is a primary key which is used to reference a concrete entity in a relation to another entity. And there's one more thing about the primary keys. The primary key can be marked in the entity relationship model, in the entity relationship diagram, with a special notation. The special notation is that you underline the attributes which build up the primary key. So in this case of the student, what you see here, the student has an attribute, student number, and you underline the student number if you want to say, if you want to express that the student number is the primary key. In the case of our student project, we have two attributes which are underlined because the student project is somehow weaker than a student, so to say, and therefore we build up the primary key of the student project from two attributes, from the student number and the project number. We talked about the foreign keys which somehow reference another entity in a third entity. And if you write up the entity relationship model, or if you write it down in the textual notation, then you do not talk about the foreign keys. You just mention the primary keys, but the foreign keys are not represented in the ERM. We will see later that the foreign keys are important for the transformation into the database model, in our case the relational database model, and there we will see that we make a special move, so to say, with the foreign keys, that we get this relation from one entity to the other one.